This brings us to the last session for today, and this is Identity Governance in DPI, Enabling Continuous Assurance and Trust. And we have Mike Schwartz, founder and CEO of Gluu, to take us through this.
Okay, I'm going to get this going. Thank you to MOSIP and the dedicated MOSIP team for putting this great conference together. Thank you to Morocco for hosting this great event, and thank you for you last attendees who hung out to this last session. And I will keep this short because I know everyone is ready to get to the next session. So just a quick note, what's the difference between Gluu and MOSIP? We're both open source identity platforms. You guys know what MOSIP is, so I'll skip this, but I'll just say a couple of words about Gluu. So Gluu was founded in 2009, and the goal was to build an open source identity and access management platform for enterprises. And I see MOSIP and Gluu as sort of adjacent, where MOSIP is really focused on citizen identity, identifying people and issuing them credentials, and Gluu is more focused on the enterprise infrastructure side. How do enterprises consume that identity? How do they control access to resources? And also, how do they identify not just humans, but also software and establish trust between different systems? Gluu is a commercial company. I'm the founder of Gluu, but I also lead an open source project at the Linux Foundation called the Janssen Project. Janssen Project is a DPI, and Gluu is the commercial distribution of the Janssen Project. But today I want to talk to you about governance. Joshua from the Philippines, he said sort of briefly, we need governance, and that was really, I was waiting for him to say more, so I think this is sort of the follow-up to his observation. But before I dive into that, I just sort of wanted to define why do we need governance? And the main reason we need governance is because as an enterprise or an organization, we need security. And it's helpful to think about the derivation of the word security. As an English major, I love words. And so if you break down security, the first part of security, SE, means without, and cura means without care, concern, or worry. So to be carefree is to be secure. And so why do we need security? We need security so we can sleep at night. So if we're secure, then we don't have to worry, and that's really what organizations want. When you talk to the leaders at organizations, they don't want to hear the details about how the infrastructure works or how resilient it is. What they really want to know is, like, should I be worried? So I think that's the root cause of why we govern. We govern because we need security. But what does governance actually mean? So I define governance as in three parts. So the first part of governance is that we need to know, in order to achieve security and in order to sleep at night, we need to know that we've mitigated the biggest risks out there. So we'll never mitigate all the risks, but if we're doing our job as governors, we've looked at all the risks, we've ranked those risks, and we've tried to mitigate the biggest risks. So risk management is really the core of governance. And so the second part is accountability. So what happens when things go wrong, as they inevitably will? So when things go wrong, that we need to know who is responsible for that. And that can be which person, which organization, or which piece of software. And this is really where the identity layer connects. Without accountability, or in order to have accountability, we need to identify the people, organizations, and software that are involved. And the last part of governance is transparency. So we want to be able to understand that the system is working, that things are being monitored continuously. So governance means that we've built systems in our organization that deliver these three properties. So who governs? You know, AI is doing everything today. Our systems, our IT systems are so complicated. Can't AI do it for us? But actually, I'm sorry to report that, you know, AI governing is abdication. Governing sort of implicitly means that some human is looking at all the risks and saying we've done our job mitigating those risks. It's just something that can't be delegated to software to do for us. Now, people frequently conflate governance and compliance. So governance is actually a superset of compliance. This is a slide that I saw at a session at KubeCon, and so it talks about where does compliance come from? So compliance, it starts with best practices. So in the industry, we decide there's some best practice out there. Everyone should use multi-factor authentication, for example. And then various compliance frameworks like NIST or SOC or ISO, they define these best practices as requirements. And then, what we do is we implement policies, and the policies say that we're going to implement these best practices, and then we're able to assess those policies and report that we've actually complied with these requirements. And a policy without an assessment procedure is a recommendation. So in order to have an auditable compliance report, we must have assessment procedures for each policy. But compliance is just the bare minimum of what you need to do to be a responsible organization. So you could say compliance is the minimum amount of diligence, but it won't cover all of your security risks. Inevitably, compliance only covers the things that have been established as best practices, but in addition to, let's say, new things that might not be established best practices, we also might have bilateral agreements that we need to comply with. So I think the important point here is that compliance or that governance is a superset of compliance, that governance is continuous. Whereas compliance happens periodically when we get audited, compliance is something, in order to sleep at night, we need to look at our risks every day. We can't look at our risks only once a quarter or once a year. So compliance is more continuous and more comprehensive. Or I'm sorry, governance is more continuous and comprehensive. So how have we been governing in the past? And this is where you might have heard of a term called identity governance or Identity Governance Administration, or IGA for short. And the basic game plan here is that we inventory all the people in our organization, we assign them roles, we map these roles to entitlements, and we periodically review these roles. Now, if you're thinking about a consumer or citizen-facing system, you can see how this governance paradigm is already starting to fall apart. But this IGA literally is one-to-one tied with role-based access control. And so how is IGA not purpose-built for what we need today? So first of all, IGA is not expressive enough, or specifically RBAC, or role-based access control, is not expressive enough. So we need to make all sorts of policies. If we have a policy about how a citizen needs to present a certain type of identification in order to get a certain type of benefit, how exactly are you going to put that into a role-based access control model? It just doesn't really fit. Beyond that, we have all sorts of new systems that are accessing data. We have AI systems that are calling APIs, that are calling other APIs. We have organizational, inter-organizational, trust requirements. This organization can share this data with this organization. And so the idea that we'll be able to model all of our policies in role-based access control is just not possible today. I mentioned the workforce orientation and how citizens and software are really pushing the boundaries beyond workforce with regard to governance. The governance that we defined 20 years ago was really oriented towards humans. And now there's more software entities out there than there are humans. If you just think about your mobile phone, you probably have 20 or 30 apps on your mobile phones that are doing things in the background. And those apps are connecting to online services. And so the amount of software out there is, the number of software entities out there really, even today, greatly exceeds the amount of actual humans. And this is only going to get worse as we see more agentic AI take on more responsibilities or more actions for humans. Now this one is kind of deep, but what I'll say is that risk is actually derived from capabilities, not identities. And I'll use a metaphor here. If you think about your house, and you think about all the doors in your house, and each door represents a different risk. And then you have people in your house, and those people have keys, and each key might open multiple doors. So what becomes difficult for us is to basically go from the people to the risk. So the doors have risk. I have one door that might be an Asia door, or one door is a financial services door, and one door is a health services door. So by inventorying the doors, I could get an idea of the risk. But if my governance system is about managing the people, I'm 2 layers removed from the doors, because first I have one layer that goes to keys, and then I have another abstraction that goes to doors. And so in a way, we've separated the risk from what we're inventorying, and that really makes it more challenging for us to understand our fundamental obligation of governance, which is, are we at risk? And finally, I'll add that our previous identity governance model was a pre-federation world where we had employees that work for our company, but the world is much more federated. We have employees, we have consumers, we have citizens, we have agents, and so we have a much more interconnected world, and we need a new, more modern governance framework to address this. So this is where I introduce a new term called GovOps. This is not government ops, but governance ops. And so the big change with governance is that we're not going to inventory people. We're going to inventory capabilities. What are the digital things that my organization can do? And we're going to assign both risk and reward to each capability. Without both the risk and the reward, we can't prioritize. For example, if we have something that is really low value but high risk, it's maybe not as important to mitigate that to something that's really high value and high risk. So we need to understand both sides of the equation. We need to address our interdomain world, the fact that we have people and software that are originating from within our organization and external to our organization. Our governance system needs to move in real time. We can't audit like once a quarter or once a year. We need to make governance continuous, something that we do every day. And finally, we need to make governance provable. We need to use math and formal reasoning in order to really understand what our risks are. So the three design goals are declarative, provable, and continuous. Provable, I just mentioned, there's new areas of math that enable us to look at our policies, use a more mathematically provable mechanism in order to analyze our policies, to automate the assessment procedures. And declarative means that instead of saying what we shouldn't do, we need to say what you can do. The list of what you shouldn't do is infinite. So we can't really address that. We have to somehow bound what we're governing. And we do that by making declarations of what should be, not what should not be. So from an architectural perspective, one of the challenges of IT is that if you look at all of the different markets and all the different software products, there's just so many. I call this the balkanization of IT. There's so many segments. Every vendor, when they go to market, they want to define a new market category, so they define a new segment. So now we have hundreds of segments. So we need some type of simplifying way to look at our IT architecture. And so what I'm presenting at GovOps is that we break our infrastructure into these four layers: the governance layer, the identity layer, the visibility layer, and the event layer. And I use this analogy, I am anthropomorphizing this problem a little bit and saying the governance is the brains. We have to think about what our risks are. And the body is the identity layer. So identity is still really important. Without identity, we can't have accountability. The visibility layer is if we can't see what's going on in our organization, we won't be able to govern. So we need telemetry and observability in order to be able to understand what's happening in our IT environment. And finally, we need muscle memory. When things happen, we have to react. Great boxers or karate experts, they do the same movements over and over again so that when things happen, they know what to do. So similarly, we need an event framework that enables us to recognize when things happen, like an account is revoked or a security breach is reported. We need sort of a graph of what might happen and what our reaction should be. We'll never be able to graph everything, but we need to be able to at least be ready to graph what we can predict. So what would this new GovOps look like as a practice? And so the three most important services we want to talk about is policy authoring and analysis. This is where we try and work with application developers to externalize their policies so that we can't govern policies we don't know about. So as an organization, we want to establish standards for how policies are expressed. And if we can get a common standard for policies, then we can use mathematical analysis tools in order to uncover risks that would otherwise not be detectable. For example, maybe we have contradictory policies where I'm granted the right to do something in one place, but I'm denied the right to do it in somewhere else. By analyzing our policies, we can understand sort of holistically how the applications and infrastructure works together. We need to do a better job managing trust. So it's a federated world. I was encouraged to see that The Philippines said 50 RPs were in productions. I've seen similar numbers of great success. This means that we have a lot of autonomous domains that are working together, and we need to formalize how we express that trust as an organization. Which organizations do we trust? Which assertions do we trust them to make? Which claims in those assertions are authoritative? Which signatures or what type of cryptography is required by our partners? All of this stuff comes under federation management, and we just need to get better at it. And then finally, I said compliance is only a subset of governance, but compliance is still really important. It's an important goal of governance, and in fact, it might be the thing that enables you to get funding for your governance program. There's a saying, never let good compliance budget go to waste. So organizations, a lot of times, they don't fund things that are nice to have. They only fund things that are must-haves. Compliance is a must-have. And so it might be a way to go to your business owners and say, we must have this, get the compliance funded, and it fits within this larger framework that helps you build your governance program. So with that, I'm going to wrap it up and keep it short. I'm happy to take some questions, but I'll just leave you with some calls to action. So GovOps is not a product. GovOps is a new body of knowledge and a new approach and architecture that we're trying to build. We're hoping to form a group at the Linux Foundation under the Open SSF. That's the Open Source Security Foundation. Linux Foundation has a number of sub-chartered organizations like CNCF, like Janssen Project, which I lead. We feel that Open SSF is a good place to coalesce a group of vendors, integrators, enterprises, and governments to help us build this body of knowledge and practices. The communication channel is going to be a LinkedIn group. I just hate email and I get too much email, so I'm trying to find a better way to get, that means I don't have to check my email on yet another mailing list. So we'll see how that goes. It might end up being a mailing list, but there's already a LinkedIn group. All of this will be, all of the work will be under Linux Foundation, uses Apache 2 and Creative Commons. And this will be formed as a separate GitHub organization. And my final call for action for you is if you're at an enterprise, to rethink application security at your organization, move towards externalizing policies, and move towards standard policy syntaxes, like the CEDAR policy syntax that was developed by Amazon and contributed to this CNCF recently. So with that, I will say thank you, and if any of you have questions, I'm happy to take a couple questions. Otherwise, we can chat outside with coffee and tea. Any questions?
Hi, I'm Hitesh. You had mentioned about RBAC being a deterrent. What's your opinion on FGA, fine grain authorization? I think so. There's a paper by Google called as Zanzibar, which deals about policy creation and authorization at a much finer level than what RBAC allows presently. So,
yeah. So actually, I think that we need all the above. Actually, RBAC is still really important. Many applications use RBAC, and RBAC is deterministic, so we still need RBAC. It's just that RBAC isn't good enough. So I think we need all the tools available at our disposal. Graphs, so you mentioned Zanzibar, which is a graph-based authorization framework, and graphs are really good at certain things, and they're not really good at other things. So the graphs are really good when you have all the data, and so you can think of graphs as like almost like a database application.
Yeah.
It's a database that stores all of the things that you need to know, and then it creates a fast lookup procedure where you can say, does this person own this document? Well, you can just look it up. But policies, graphs aren't enough because we don't always know everything. And so while I think we need graphs because graphs are very elegant for certain types of problems, I don't think graphs by themselves are a silver bullet. And when we make universal statements to achieve declarative security, we need to make statements about the future. No S3 bucket will ever be unencrypted rather. And so I can't express that in a graph. And so a lot of our policies that we want to express, that we want to analyze, are about things that we don't yet know about. And so ultimately, I think we need all of the above. But I mentioned CEDAR, and one of the advantages of CEDAR is that it creates a more bounded world by allowing you to define what schema you're going to allow. But using that schema, you can define policies which can be executed and analyzed. And so, anyway, I think yes, graphs are important, but won't be sufficient. So,
thank you.
It's really late, so I'll be around for the next 3 days. Look for my hat. I'm tall. You can find me. Happy to chat, and please join us at in the GovOps working group. The timing on that is we're hoping to finish by the end of February. Look for an announcement in March, and then I hope anyone who's interested will join us in that effort. Thank you very much.